The sound that woke me wasn't a voice. It was a chair scraping backward across tile, sharp, impatient, final. I was already awake. I usually am. Morning light leaked through the kitchen window in thin, pale strips, cutting across the table where I sat with a spoon frozen halfway to my mouth. The oatmeal had gone cold. Not because I forgot about it, but because something in the air had shifted. You learn to recognize that feeling after a certain age. The moment when a room stops belonging to you. My son didn't sit down. He stood near the counter, coffee in hand, eyes already tired. Standing gives people authority. It keeps the conversation short. Across the room, his wife lingered at the sink, rinsing a mug that was already clean. Her back turned like avoidance was a task she could finish quickly and be done with. "Mom," he said. Not softly, not harshly, just efficiently. "We've been talking." That sentence landed heavier than it should have. I looked at him and waited. Years of motherhood teach you that silence often pulls the truth out faster than questions ever could. "You've had a good run here," he continued, as if he were commenting on the weather. "But it's time you moved out." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They sat there, solid and immovable, like furniture someone had already decided to replace. For a moment, I wondered if my hearing had finally betrayed me. Age does that, steals little things without warning. But this I heard clearly. "I'm sorry," I said slowly. "What did you just say?" He sighed, the way people do when they think they're being reasonable and you're being difficult. "It's not personal. It's just this house. It's not really working for us anymore." That word has a way of shrinking you. I glanced around the kitchen. My kitchen. Yellow walls I chose because they made winters feel shorter. The crooked cabinet door his father never fixed because he liked the way it reminded him we built this place ourselves. The table where scraped knees were kissed. Homework was argued over. And grief once sat quietly in the center after a funeral no one wanted to attend. His wife finally turned around. "We're saying this with love," she added carefully. "Love doesn't usually come with an exit plan." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I needed my body to stay still. Shock moves fast. Pride moves slowly. I folded my napkin the way I always do when I don't trust my voice. "So," I said evenly, "you've already decided." He nodded, relieved. "We'll help you find a place. Somewhere more suitable." Suitable. That night, long after their laughter floated upstairs and doors closed, I sat alone by the cold fireplace with a blanket over my knees. 47 years in this house. Built with scraped knuckles, borrowed tools, and a kind of stubborn love people don't recognize anymore. They thought I would leave quietly. They were wrong. Because before the sun rose again, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years, and everything I thought I knew about endings began to change. They believed I was preparing to leave. What they didn't realize was, I had already decided how this would end. The drawer resisted when I pulled it open. Not because it was stuck, but because it hadn't been disturbed in a long time. Old wood has a way of remembering hands. It groaned softly, like it was tired of holding its breath. Inside there were no photographs, no love letters, no keepsakes meant to be passed down with stories and smiles. Just paper, receipts, checks, envelopes yellowed at the edges. The kind of things no one ever looks at unless they're searching for proof. This drawer didn't hold memories. It held evidence. I sat on the edge of the bed and lifted the stack carefully, as if the years might scatter if I moved too fast. Every piece of paper carried my handwriting. Steady, consistent, quiet. I'd never thought much of it before. Writing was just something you did when life required it. But now, looking at it all together, I saw what it really was. A record of giving without asking. A check for my son's first car. The old rust-colored thing that died in the middle of winter and left him stranded and crying at 19. I'd written the check the same day. Hands shaking more from worry than cold. Another for his student loans. "Just until I get back on my feet," he'd said. That was over 20 years ago. There were more. Tuition. Repairs. Medical bills. Even the down payment on this house. The one they now said wasn't working for us anymore. I traced my finger along the numbers, the dates. Years compressed into ink. No bitterness rose in me. Not yet. Just a heavy understanding. Somewhere along the way, helping had turned into expectation. And expectation had quietly hardened into entitlement. Upstairs, the house shifted with morning routines that no longer included me. The sound of running water, doors opening and closing, a life moving forward without ever checking who it was stepping over. I closed the drawer slowly, the way you tuck in a child who doesn't know they've outgrown you. Later that morning, I brewed a pot of coffee no one else drank and stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked beneath my feet. Recognition. Tom used to say the house knew my step, that it greeted me even when people didn't. Fog hovered low over the yard, clinging to the ground like it wasn't ready to let go yet. I wrapped Tom's old flannel tighter around my shoulders and breathed in damp earth and memory. They didn't want me gone because I was weak. They wanted me gone because I reminded them where everything began. By the time the sun lifted fully, the decision had settled deep in my bones. Not anger, not revenge, clarity. If I was leaving this house, it wouldn't be because I was pushed out politely with brochures and smiles. It would be because I chose how this chapter closed. I opened the closet and reached for the small lockbox tucked high on the shelf. My fingers entered the code without hesitation. Tom's birthday. Inside sat the things that mattered. The deed. Paid in full. My name. His name. The house wasn't theirs. Not yet. Not ever. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Charlotte, I said when she answered. Helen. Her voice softened immediately. Is everything all right? No, I said quietly. But it's about to be. There was a pause. The listening kind. The kind that doesn't rush you into explaining. I need your help, I continued. Quietly. Another pause. Then steady and sure. I'm in. I hung up and looked around the room. The bed. The window. The life I was being gently asked to pack away. They thought this was a family conversation. They didn't know I had just turned it into something else entirely. They believed I was preparing to leave. They had no idea I was preparing to decide who would stay. We didn't put up a sign. That was the first rule. No bright red letters screaming for sale into the neighborhood. No strangers wandering through the rooms where my life still clung to the walls. This wasn't about announcing anything. It was about moving carefully, like handling something fragile that could shatter if too many eyes stared at it at once. Charlotte understood immediately. No noise, she said when she came by that afternoon. No gossip. Just people who know how to walk into an old house without trying to conquer it. That mattered to me more than price. Upstairs, my son was on another call, his voice sharp and important behind a closed door. His wife had gone out, heels clicking away from the house like she was already practicing how it would sound without me in it. They had no idea anyone else was being invited in. I walked through the room slowly with a yellow notepad in my hand. Keep. Give away. Leave behind. Each word felt heavier than the last. In the hallway, I paused at the place where the floor dipped slightly near the third step. Tom never fixed that. He said it reminded him that houses like people didn't need to be perfect to be strong. I wrote leave next to the small bench beneath the window. Someone else would sit there soon tying shoes, waiting for life to catch up. My son's old room stopped me longer than I expected. The wallpaper was still there. Rockets and stars peeling at the corners. He wanted to be an astronaut once. I remembered saving grocery money to buy him a telescope, pretending soup and toast were a fun challenge that winter. I stood in the doorway and realized something painful and sharp. He didn't remember any of that. Or maybe remembering hurt too much. The first visitors came on a Wednesday morning. Charlotte arrived early, calm as ever. Like this was just another appointment. But I felt it in my chest, the quiet gravity of strangers stepping into a life that wasn't finished saying goodbye. Elaine and Martin. They didn't rush. They didn't whisper like they were in a museum. Elaine ran her fingers along the banister, not checking for dust but acknowledging the wear. Martin lingered in the yard longer than necessary, asking about the trees instead of the square footage. This place has lived, Elaine said softly. Yes, I replied. It has. We sat at the kitchen table with tea in the blue mugs I saved for company. No one mentioned remodeling. No one asked about tearing down walls. They asked about winters, about morning light, about whether the house ever felt lonely. When they left, Charlotte looked at me carefully. They want to make an offer. So soon? I asked. She nodded. Full price. I didn't answer right away. I stared at the wall where a photo used to hang. The nail was still there, patient. "Let's wait," I said finally. "I want to be sure." That night, I placed an envelope on the kitchen table. My son's name written neatly across the front. Inside were no explanations. Just paperwork. Some truths don't need speeches. They need silence. They believed nothing had changed. But by the time they noticed the quiet, the house was already slipping away from them. I left on a morning that didn't feel important. No storms. No dramatic sky. Just pale sunlight and the low hum of routine. The kind of day people forget later, until they realize something went missing inside it. They were both gone. My son had rushed out early, phone pressed to his ear, already mid-conversation with someone who needed him more than I did. His wife followed soon after, heels sharp against the floor, keys jingling with purpose. Neither of them looked back. Neither of them noticed the stillness I carried behind my eyes. I waited until the sound of the car faded before moving. I didn't rush. I didn't hesitate either. My bags were already packed. Not everything, just what mattered. Tom's old journal. A handful of photographs. The quilt my mother stitched when I married. The rest of the house could keep its own memories. It didn't need me to carry them anymore. The kitchen was the last room I stood in. The table sat exactly where it always had, its surface worn smooth by decades of hands and elbows. I ran my palm over it once, slow and steady. Not goodbye. Just acknowledgement. Then I placed the envelope at the center. My son's name faced upward. Inside, nothing emotional. No explanations. No accusations. Just papers. Cold. Final. The kind of truth that doesn't ask permission to be understood. At the front door, I paused longer than I expected. Not because I doubted myself, but because the house felt complete. Like a story that had reached its final sentence without needing to say it out loud. I locked the door. The keys slid through the mail slot with a soft metallic sound that echoed longer than it should have. I didn't keep a copy. Some endings don't allow returns. The taxi waited at the curb, engine idling patiently. The driver didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. People who leave quietly usually have reasons that don't fit into small talk. As we pulled away, I didn't look back. Not once. The inn was small, neutral, temporary. That was exactly what I needed. A place that didn't know me, didn't expect anything from me, didn't ask why I arrived alone with only 2 bags and a tired kind of calm. I slept deeper than I had in years. The phone started ringing mid-afternoon. I watched it light up on the nightstand. My son's name. Once. Twice. Again. I didn't answer. Messages followed. Confusion at first. Then panic. Then anger disguised as disbelief. Why is there a sold sign in front of the house? What did you do? Call me now. I turned the phone face down. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine I'd been saving for something special, and sat by the window watching cars pass that had nothing to do with me. The world didn't pause. It never does. Freedom, I realize, doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, after the door closes. Rehook. They came home expecting answers. Instead, they found a silence they couldn't escape. I returned before dawn. Not because I wanted to see them, but because I wanted to see the house one last time while it was still quiet. While it hadn't yet learned new footsteps. While it still remembered mine. Charlotte had arranged it. One final morning. No interruptions. The door was unlocked when I arrived. The air inside felt different. Not cold, just hollow. The furniture was gone. The photos were gone. Even the rug that used to curl at the corners had vanished. What remained was space. Honest space. The kind that tells the truth whether you're ready or not. I stepped inside and stopped. He was sitting on the floor. My son. Right there in the living room where Christmas mornings once exploded with noise and wrapping paper. He sat with his back against the wall, knees bent, arms resting on them like a boy waiting to be called into the principal's office. He looked smaller without the house holding him up. "Mom," he said, standing too quickly when he saw me. His voice cracked, not from anger but from shock. "You sold it." "Yes. You didn't even tell us." "I didn't need to." He stared at me like I'd broken some unspoken rule. "We were going to renovate. We had plans." Plans. That word again. I walked past him without answering, my footsteps echoing louder than I expected. The kitchen was bare. No table. No chairs. Just faint outlines on the floor where things used to belong. Do you have any idea how this feels? He said behind me. Coming home and finding everything gone? I stopped. Slowly I turned to face him. I do, I said. I know exactly how it feels. The words landed harder than I intended. He froze, realization flickering across his face like a light he'd never turned on before. That's not what we meant, he said quickly. We weren't trying to push you out. You asked me to leave my own home, I replied. You just use kinder words. He rubbed his face with both hands, pacing now. We were trying to help. You could have stayed. We could have worked something out. Worked me out. I looked at him, really looked. The lines of stress. The tired eyes. The man who'd learned how to take without noticing when he stopped asking. I raised you in this house, I said quietly. I held it together when your father couldn't. I stayed quiet when it was easier for you that way. And when it was your turn to make room, you offered me an exit. His shoulders slumped. I didn't realize, he started. No, I interrupted gently. You didn't look. The room went still. No anger left in the air. Just truth. What happens now? He asked. I start again, I said. And you learned something you should have learned sooner. I walked past him toward the door. He didn't follow. He didn't stop me. Some lessons only land when there's nothing left to hold on to. Outside, the sky had begun to lighten. I breathed in once, deep, steady, and stepped away. I thought that would be the end. But understanding has a way of arriving late and asking for another chance. The new place didn't try to impress me. No grand entrance. No polished floors that demanded careful footsteps. Just a small cottage tucked between two older trees, the kind that had seen enough seasons to mind their own business. When I unlocked the door for the first time, it didn't echo. It exhaled. That felt right. I set my bags down and stood there for a long moment listening. No one sighing behind me. No television murmuring in the next room. No footsteps overhead reminding me where I fit. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was borrowing space. I unpacked slowly, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to choose what stayed and what didn't. The quilt went over the back of the chair. Tom's flannel on the hook by the door. A single photo on the dresser, me and my son when he was 5. His arms wrapped around my leg like I was the only thing keeping him upright. The rest stayed in boxes. Outside, the neighborhood moved gently. A woman waved as she passed with groceries. I didn't know her name yet, but she smiled like I belonged there anyway. Jake called on the 4th day. I let it ring once before answering. Mom, he said, softer than before. Can we talk? We talked. Not about the house. Not about money. About silence. About what happens when people mistake availability for permanence. I didn't know how much space I was taking, he admitted quietly, until it was gone. I didn't rush to comfort him. Growth needs room to breathe. You don't have to understand everything, I said. Just remember that I was still walking my own path. There was a pause. Then, I see you now. That mattered. Not because it fixed the past, but because it acknowledged it. Days passed differently here. I shopped when I wanted. Read without interruption. Sat on the porch in the evening watching light fade without explaining myself to anyone. I wasn't lonely. I was alone, and there's a difference. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the library. My name written neatly on the envelope. The woman at the post office smiled when she handed it over. Welcome to the neighborhood, she said. I smiled back. That night, I pulled open the drawer of the small desk by the window and took out an envelope I'd prepared weeks ago. My granddaughter's name written on the front. Inside were words she wasn't ready to read yet, but one day would need. Because I didn't leave the house to teach my son a lesson. I left to remind myself I still had a voice. And I wasn't finished using it. Just when I thought the hardest part was over, one final conversation brought everything full circle. The kettle whistled just as the light reached the kitchen window. I didn't rush to turn it off. I let the sound fill the room, sharp but honest. Some noises don't need to be silenced quickly. They remind you that you're still here. I poured the water, wrapped my hands around the cup, and sat at the small table by the window. Outside, the trees moved with the wind. Not resisting, not surrendering. Just existing the way they were meant to. That morning, a letter waited for me on the porch. My son's handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I'd learned that some things deserve patience. When I finally did, his words weren't dramatic. No excuses. No defense. Just truth. He wrote that the house felt empty now, not because the furniture was gone, but because he finally understood what had been holding it together. He wrote that he had been mistaking presence for permanence, love for obligation, silence for consent. And at the bottom, 3 words he hadn't said in years. I see you. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer. Not the one filled with old sacrifices, but a new one. A drawer meant for closure. Later that day, my granddaughter Ellie came to visit. She ran into the cottage like she always does, too fast, too loud, full of life. She handed me a drawing she'd made. It was our old house. Big windows. A crooked tree in the yard. And me standing on the porch, smiling. "Why don't you live there anymore?" she asked, sudden and curious. I thought for a moment, then answered honestly. Because sometimes, when people stop seeing you clearly, you have to walk away so they remember what they lost. She frowned, thinking hard. Did it work? I smiled. You'll have to ask your dad. That night, after she left, I sat alone again, but it felt different now. Not like absence. Like space. The kind you grow into. I realized then that the morning they asked me to leave, the moment that felt like erasure, was actually an invitation. Not to disappear, but to begin again. They thought I was preparing to leave. What I was really doing was choosing myself. And here's the truth no one tells you until it's almost too late. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe anyone your shrinking. And you don't need permission to take up space, especially in the life you built. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of someone who stayed quiet for too long, or if it helped you feel a little less alone, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real stories told from the heart. Because sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is quietly walk away and begin again.